You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Welcome back to CrimsonCast. Galen Clavio, Scott Caulfield joining you. It is the 6th of October, and Indiana is bowl eligible. Just going to let that sink in for a second, Scott.
Bring back the Bison, never daunted. See you guys later.
There you go.
That's
I'm not sure what else needs to be said. Wow. I am fresh back from Evanston. Drove back last night right after the game. Got a lot of thoughts on that. We got a lot of thoughts on what's going on with this IU season.
Before we jump into it, I got to say, I was thinking about this yesterday. You have something very important. A lot of things good are happening, but you have something at your feet here.
I know I do. I know where you're going with this, but go ahead.
I love that you already know. East Lansing is only 5.5 hours away. Columbus is 4.5. You have a chance of seeing every game this season in person.
There were a lot of conversations had outside and inside the stadium yesterday about me running the table with IU football, and I'm going to try to make it happen. This is
I love it.
This is the new drive. All right, we are going, I think, to go to all 12 regular season.
Announcing it here? Is it being announced here live on CrimsonCast?
I am going to officially announce my candidacy
for the drive in 2024.
The full running of the table in 2024. Yeah, I've been to all 6 games so far, and I would like to note to Mr. Crimson Cash himself, James Turner, I was not the problem. Okay, I just want to get that out of the way. I think we've established that finally. 2 road games, 2 victories, and we got a ton to talk about with all of that. But yes, Scott, I knew exactly where you were going as soon as you said that.
I love the idea of your candidacy. Like, if you get really, really tired after the Ohio State game, we can be like, do we need to drop Galen and bring somebody else up, like his vice president? Like, does Scott need to step in and take over? And we can really have fun with this. But no, I was thinking about that. I'm glad, great minds work alike, and I want to see you run the table.
I'm excited about it now. And like you said, I mean, actually, and it'll be great because I've never been, believe it or not, to East Lansing for either basketball or football. It's always been something, it's been one of the 2 big holes on my resume from a Big Ten perspective. So we're going to check that one off. And then Ohio State, I've been, but never for an IU game. I've only been to the Big House twice. I went once for a Rolling Stones concert on the Bridges to Babylon tour. That was a great show. And then I also went, for those who I think know this, I grew up in the West Lafayette area, and a bunch of my friends were big Purdue fans, so they invited me along, I think in fall of 2001, to go see Purdue at Ohio State. So that's the only time, that's pre-renovation and everything. So yeah, we're going to check that off as well. So I can't think of a better team to do it with.
It means like college football playoff, like you're going to have a busy fall break. Like you could have possible bowl games to go to. Like,
yep. Yeah. So anyway, we'll talk about me at the end with that. But no, I mean, this IU team is absolutely worth traveling for. It's been a lot of fun. We're going to talk all about the scene up in Evanston in a little bit. But first of all, just a reminder, folks, that we are brought to you by Home Field Apparel. Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs, including the new pullover series that they announced last week. An amazing 90s retro IU pullover with the oval logo, which you can see here on the YouTube. If you're
oval on the sleeve, the cool Indiana like 90s font on there. And I will help you out here by saying the reason you want to sign up for their updates is not only got an email and a text saying they were released, I then got a text like 2 days later saying, hey, we're almost sold out. Like, wow. Home Field will continue letting you know, and most of the things do sell out, so it's a nice thing to know. But yeah, they let me know. Unfortunately, I was not fast enough on this one either. My size was already gone, but they look really good.
Yeah. So head over to Home Field Apparel, and you'll find pretty much anything you're looking for, whether it's hoodies, whether it's pullovers, whether it's T-shirts, long sleeves. Again, every time I go out and see the peoples, I see the peoples wearing Home Field. And there were so many people wearing Home Field up in Evanston, both teams. I mean, or both fans, although it was like 70% Indiana fans, it felt like up there. But everybody wearing Home Field, it was exciting to see. And we couldn't be happier to have them as our title sponsor here on the Back Home Network. So go to homefieldapparel.com, follow them on social media. They do a great job, especially on Instagram. And sign up for the newsletter, the text. It's funny, like you'll buy something from them, and then they know, oh, this person likes this. Like I got an update for Tulane stuff yesterday because I love that Tulane baseball 3/4 tee. And I'm always like, I'm a little Tulane curious. I might dabble a little bit. So anyway, go check out homefieldapparel.com.
They have stickers. You should put one on the car. Like it supports the Galen road trip of the 2024.
You're right. Actually,
like NASCAR, like you need to have the logos.
I need like the bunting on the side of the F-150. Like a political vehicle. Like Clavio, like run the table 24. I like this.
I know, but then it's the stickers on like right by the wheel well. Like they're small sponsors, and
the stickers keep the bunting on the truck. That's how it works, Scott. Anyway. Also, a reminder, folks, that we are on Substack, CrimsonCast.substack.com. Go sign up. It's free. Get all the podcasts delivered right to your inbox and occasional extra goodies if you are a paid subscriber, which is not an obligation, but we appreciate it. Helps keep the lights on with the podcast. $5 a month, $50 a year. Again, CrimsonCast.substack.com. The free newsletter will always be free, and you'll get podcasts delivered right to your email inbox. Also, a quick reminder, we are sponsored by Hoosier Game Day Lager, the official craft beer of IU Athletics.
I had 2 of those yesterday. I'm watching on my patio. I had some friends over. We had a TV out on the patio, and it was great. I had 2 of them. I also have my Indiana football koozie that I got at the alumni event at UCLA. But it's striped, and the can was striped. And one of my neighbors, who's not a big IU fan, was like, "Oh, is your can?" Like halfway through, I was like, "Oh, your can is striped too." And I'm like, "Oh yes, this is the Hoosier Game Day Lager, Upland Brewing." And like, "Oh, I thought it was just the koozie." Like, that's pretty cool. I'm like, "Yes." Scott has a lot of cool things.
You really do merge form and function incredibly well, Scott. It's fascinating.
I take other people's, I merge what they already had. Yes.
Anyway, the Hoosier Game Day Lager, iconic candy striped can available everywhere that you buy beer in central and southern Indiana, including Upland's many locations, as well as all of your liquor stores, grocery stores, whatnot that carry Upland products. Enjoy a Hoosier Game Day Lager while you're watching IU football, both in the stadium or, if you're like Scott, on your patio. Again, Hoosier Game Day Lager from Upland Brewing Company. Please drink responsibly. All right, Scott, you wanted to start in a little different way, and I'm all about it. It's a momentous day. Indiana, one of only 2 bowl-eligible teams in college football, and man, the other bowl-eligible team is either incredibly lucky or the ACC is just doing a lot of things for them. But like Indiana and Miami, the only 2 teams that are bowl eligible right now. Indiana held the solo crown for like a solid 8 hours. And this is essentially unprecedented territory. Like it's not the first time.
I mean, those are both your universities. Like this is the Galen 2024.
I couldn't be more thrilled about all of that. But I mean, what's fascinating to me is like
Tulane comes in third after you being Tulane curious. Maybe it's like this is a simulation.
I'm not worried about that, but I'm really fascinated though, like where we're at with this team. Bowl eligibility is like it's the undiscovered country. It's like the thing right out of reach for IU football almost every year. To be bowl eligible after playing the minimum number of games in a season it's something that happens to other people as opposed to happening to IU football fans. And Scott, as we talked about a little bit last week, as we've heard in a couple of other venues, it kind of resets the way you think about the program in a way that nothing else does. So, I mean, your overall thoughts right now about where Indiana football is at before we get into the actual replay of the game.
Yeah, so I had kind of 2 high-level thoughts. So let me start with one we can discuss and then go to the second. But the first one is exactly what you're talking about, that, we're bowl eligible. I even wrote down, like, let that sink in. Like, just we are bowl eligible. It's October 6th. But I think the first thing we all have to kind of understand is, and I'm the king of this with the fever dreams and looking at, the future, there's a lot of fun blue skies and runway ahead. But I don't think that changes the expectations, the floor of this season, which is and so no matter what happens here, from here on out, even if things don't go the way that we think they could, or there's a lot of good possible games that maybe we don't win, we're going to a bowl this year. And even though we've looked really good, and this team has kind of my second point, some, real special possibilities here, even if they don't meet them, like we are at a successful season, hard stop. Like just, we are.
Yeah.
And we're at a bowl. I don't think we've ever had a coach make the bowl their first year. I mean, we haven't made a lot of bowls at all. So I just think that's something that we need to keep in mind as our
Just to clarify, unless you're going to count Bill Lynch, which you should not, because that was a different situation. No IU coach has ever coached a team to a bowl in their first season.
Yeah. So, I think that we're going to start, hitting other expectations here pretty quickly. And we probably are going to miss some things like, making the Big Ten champion, just things that are insane for an Indiana fan. But I think, if there are things that don't happen from here on out, I think people need to keep in mind that you can't, for so long, you and I would complain about moving the goalpost in kind of a negative fashion each season. I do just want to kind of lay out that I don't think now, it's wild to say, we can't move the goalpost in a positive direction, and that no matter from what happens from here on out, this is a successful season. Now, if we lose out everything, like that would be something I'm not expecting, but you're still making a bowl in your first year. And that's something that from where we've been, when we talked about this year, that was always kind of like, that would be a really nice floor. Like we're there, as you said, in the minimum number of games. So I have a second point, but that's the first one. I just want to stop on that. Like, I think, a successful season and a successful coaching change.
Well, I'll say this. Well, right. I mean, I think about it. I had a lot of time in the car driving up to Evanston. I did that whole thing in like 28 hours, I think, or something like that. And a few thoughts along those lines. First of all, you're right. It's a season that's already achieved a level of success that many people did not think was going to happen. And I will point to the voluminous preseason projections of records. Something. Yeah, a lot of, there were like legitimate journalists picking Indiana 3-9, 4-8. A couple of people said maybe 5-7. We got scoffed at, as we often are, Scott, for saying 8-4. And Indiana's 6-0. And actually, we both projected that they were going to be 6-0. So I think you and I should do a victory lap right now. Get up, or run around your desk. No, I'm kidding. But look, the key here is that IU, in the way that they've played so far, and the way that they have not trailed, I think the thing that I am the most fascinated by is that they achieved bowl eligibility before they trailed a second in a game this season. It's not just that they're bowl eligible. And this is where, like, the people who are making snide comments about, say, the schedule being too easy, I'm like, well, it'd be one thing if Indiana was squeaking by some of these teams, but they're not. I think the lowest win percentage post-game, that if you ever look at Bill Connolly's stats, like the post-game win expectancy is, how much did you actually win the game by? If it's under 51% or under 50%, you're kind of in this like, well, the other team might have won. Indiana's lowest post-game win expectancy on the season is 99.2%, which is about as good as you can get. Yesterday's game, where they didn't play, it looked like particularly well, their post-game win expectancy is 99.8% for that Northwestern game. So it's not just that they're winning. They are really, really taking care of business in these games. And that is incredibly gratifying. And to watch this team, and Kurt Signetti talked about it just a little bit in the post-game about how, he was asked, how is it that you're taking a losing program and turning it into a winning program so quickly? And essentially his answer boiled down to, you have to have a change in mentality. And that is absolutely, when you watch this team, when you watch the way they play, I know some of it comes through on television, but having been there for essentially every moment of all 6 games in person, the amount of belief that just kind of exudes out of these players and the way that they go about their business is just so fundamentally different from what I have been used to with an Indiana football program or Indiana team, like at any point, even in the successful seasons. We talked about this a little bit last week. For Indiana to, you look at 2019, there was accomplishment, but it felt almost like over accomplishment.
Right.
2015, it was like they were just right there on the razor's edge in some of those games. This feels different. This really does feel like a complete football team that is thinking along the right lines, and they're putting themselves into a position not just to win, but really to win comfortably. And even though yesterday certainly had some hairy moments where you're kind of questioning, like, there was about 25, 30 really nervous minutes there in the second half. It wasn't just that Indiana went out and won the game. It was that they went out and took the game. And that's the mentality shift that to me has been that to me is the overarching storyline of this season. It is the fact that this team is not hoping to win games. They're expecting to win games. And I know that sounds hokey, but man, when you're there and you're watching them, especially in these road environments, it was the same thing at UCLA as it was here at Northwestern. And that is so unusual for Indiana football.
So so I love podcasting with you, man. Like, you're leading right into my second point. I listened to your post-game talk on Twitter, on X, and it got me thinking, because you were exuding a lot of these same feelings in that as well. I think it's also important to say that we mentioned this a couple of times, like, something special really is happening, and something is changing with this team this year, and hopefully, systematically over the years. But I think a lot of people and a lot of my friends are tentative to kind of get into it, whether it's based on, there was some of that in 2020. People are like, oh man, I remember 2020, you were talking big. And it's like, all right, this feels different. And, just because it happened then doesn't mean it can't happen again. I think there's also just a, IU football fan. A lot of this hope has been beaten out of you. It's like, all right, well, it happened in 2020. There's no way we could have it again in 4 years later. Or the idea of like, this isn't what we do. Like, the other shoe's going to drop. Maybe it's not going to drop. And it's like, you've brought this up before, that most normal other functional fan bases that kind of haven't been beaten down, like, when they have a good year, they enjoy it. And they don't just sit there and wait for bad things to happen. It's like, oh, this can't be us. Like, it's just this idea in my mind that something really is changing. This is a special year. And if you're not bought in, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you're obviously bought in, you're into it, but go tell your friends. And like, I think this is a comfortable time to be like, you can share this with other people without feeling like you're going to get, the football pulled from you, like Lucy and Charlie Brown. Like, it's a different team, a different confidence. And, something here is happening and you can enjoy it. Don't worry about the past or 2020 or, we did this before. And like, this is just different across all the spectrum. So it's okay to treat this like you would any other team, where it's like, if the Pacers, start this season 22-2, you'd be like, man, you got to go check this team out. This team is fun as hell. They're fun to watch. Like, it does feel like there's always apprehension with IU football. I think people need to just really dive into it, because this doesn't feel like a team. They're not going to go undefeated. They're probably going to lose a game or two here or there, but I don't think they're going to break our hearts, and they're not going to come out and just suddenly become something that they're not. So that's my other high arching thought, is just, it really is something special that's happening right now with this team.
So there's a couple things that I was thinking about yesterday in relation to just that. First of all, I think most people know this if you've listened to the podcast long enough. Like, I think Reddit is kind of trash in general, but I love the CFB Reddit community. It's like one of the few really fun communities on Reddit. And it's become like a favorite thing of mine to go into the post-game threads for IU games or any story involving IU, because the IU fans, like, the joy that's coming out of all of them every time Indiana does something good. And it's kind of like a little bit of what you just said, where, I can't believe this is happening. This is amazing. This is incredible. Even people from fan bases that you would think would not like Indiana have been like, hey, we're pulling for Indiana.
Right.
It's such a great story. It's a different kind of great story from the Tom Allen teams, where it really did feel like a plucky underdog. Like, this doesn't feel that way. It feels like a team that's like, and a program that's suddenly woken up and is like, now we are taking ourselves seriously, and our fans don't know how to react. And I don't know how to react either. I mean, I got a really nice note. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing it, from Patrick, who's been a longtime listener after that post-game video that I shot yesterday. And he said, I just wanted to say congrats. Happy you can enjoy this. I've been watching you and Scott for what feels like forever. And there's been some years where it felt like, why do we do this? In quotes. Teams like this just make it all worth it. And that is absolutely how I feel. That's absolutely, I know how a ton of people feel. And
I've gotten so many emails like that too. Like, just feel like, congrats, I'm happy for you. It's almost like our kids are getting married or something.
Right. It's like, it has nothing to do with us, other than we've been talking about IU football.
God, you must be so proud. Thank you. It's like, IU football, it's taking its first steps. Like, I'm so excited. It's one of those deals where it's not about us, but as people who have talked about IU football in this format for so long, I'm glad that we are able to act as kind of the conduit for how a lot of people are feeling about IU football.
And I'm glad we've been able to have this space to talk about IU football. And look, as I was talking to somebody coming out of the stadium yesterday, it's like we get on average, like statistically, a season like this, like every 50 years or so. And we've talked so many times about like, where's what we're doing? Like, where do we get some kind of like pat on the head? Like, hey, good job for doing what you're doing. Not from other people, but from the football gods. And that's essentially how this season has felt so far. And so to go back to what you said about expectations and moving the goalposts and the season being a success, it is by any metric. I mean, we've talked about like Indiana's only been to 13 bowls in its history. Indiana has had very few seasons, relatively speaking, proportionally, where they've been 500 or better. And like you said, like if the unthinkable were to happen and they lost out, you'd reevaluate at some point what exactly happened once you were in the cold light of the next morning. But ultimately, what we're talking about is a team that has caused everybody to reset the expectations that they had for them, even the optimistic ones like you and me. And so much of that is because all of this has come together in a way that has exceeded my wildest expectations, has exceeded your wildest expectations. And I think to some degree, maybe even has exceeded the coaches and players' expectations. Like there is, and I love what I'm hearing out of the players and the coaches when we hear from them. It's very businesslike, it's very focused. And I think that the belief and the almost shock at how well this has meshed together so far in the first 6 games of the Signetti era is almost like, this sounds weird, it's almost as exciting as the results itself, because what has always been a problem for IU football culturally and competitively has been a core lack of belief in the fans and the players and the administration, everything. It's always felt like this was a program that could not get out of its own way. And to watch this program suddenly starting to feel confident again, it is to some degree, you mentioned, like the child analogy, it's like having a kid who doesn't really have a lot of confidence in themselves, and then they grow into an adult and suddenly they are confident and they're doing what they're doing. And you just wonder, like, wow, what's the ceiling now? So look, there's a lot of football left to be played. We're going to talk about some of the matchups coming up, but I can't help but be just so excited about what the rest of the season will hold, whether or not this team goes, 12-0, 11-1, 10-2, whatever. It's such a joy to watch this team play football, and it's such a joy to be in the stands and experience it with other IU fans. And there's such a pureness to the energy and a pureness to the excitement. We'll probably never have a season like this again, not because Indiana won't have successful seasons, but this is the only time when the blossom
going up. You're going up.
Opens, and suddenly you're just like, wow, this is what competitive football with a good team feels like. That has probably been the thing that I've taken home the most in all of this. It was what I was thinking about the most last night. Is I'm so thrilled to be in the midst of this right now, because this is the kind of thing that you never quite get to experience in the exact same way again. And so for those who have been making the trips, and I've seen several of you, I hope you're enjoying the thrill ride as much as I am. And for those who haven't been out to a game, I'm saying get out to a game at some point here soon if you haven't already, because it really is an exciting experience.
Well, the ride up is always more fun. Like, and go ask any Red Sox fan. Like 2004 is going to hold a special place in their hearts way more than any of the other World Series. So there's that. We have a kid at the door, so Waffles is going nuts. Wouldn't be a podcast without that. I will end this kind of high level talk with just this other stat that I just want to pull out there. And like, I'm so tired of the, soft schedule analogy. It's like, it is what it is. You play who you play. We're leading the Big Ten, right? It's October 6th. We're leading the Big Ten. We're 3-0. We played one more game than, Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State. But to kind of validate what you're saying as well about, the strength of how we've played. If you look at points for in conference games, we've scored 125 points in Big Ten games. We're the only team that has over 100. Now you could say, oh, well, Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State have only played 2 games. It's like, okay, Ohio State would need to score 52 points in their next game to match our total. Yeah. Oregon would need to score 60. Penn State would have to score 77. I mean, that's
seems unlikely. Yeah,
it seems very unlikely. Yes, we've played 3 of the teams that are haven't won, partially because they played us. Like, that is part of the reason they're not good and analytically don't look good is we kick the shit out of them. But it's also that, no one is close to our numbers offensively.
Yeah.
And it's not like we're just a one-sided team. Yes, Ohio State has less points against in, conference games, but at 65, we're right in the middle, if not middle top of, points allowed in the Big Ten. So it's a really wild. I love looking at ESPN and the Big Ten conference standing page right now. It's unbelievable. So,
well, and that segues nicely, I think, into talking about what happened in the game yesterday. So Indiana went into the game. They were a pretty big favorite in terms of the betting line. They were about an 88% favorite from FPI to start things off. I think that the line was between like 12.5 and 14, depending on where you grabbed it. So this was a really fascinating game from a number of levels. I'm going to talk about the game first, and then I'll talk about the setup. Indiana, I thought, started off pretty well. It was nice to see them get the touchdown there right at the end of the first quarter. And I think from the offensive standpoint, even though like the yardage was really impressive, there were times early on, especially, where it felt like just Indiana wasn't quite clicking the way that you would like them to. And yet you look at the stats at halftime and it's like, well, actually they're clicking very well. And, Northwestern, I think, actually deserves a ton of credit. I think a lot of us were perhaps overly harsh on Northwestern in terms of what they could do. And I count myself in that. I think if you look at Northwestern and you look at what they did in this game, this was a team that clearly was not as bad as the 27-5 loss that they had on the road versus Washington. This is not a team that travels particularly well. But they are, I think, a good enough team that they took a pretty good Duke team, to only a 6-point loss at home. That was an impressive performance by them. And I give their quarterback, Jack Losh, a ton of credit because he was able to take what the defense gave him consistently. IU was playing kind of weirdly, what felt like weirdly passive on defense, but I'm starting to think that maybe that really was the design all along. That the idea was, look, Northwestern's not as hapless offensively as a lot of people think that they are, and we're going to have to put a lot of points on the board. And what's been most exciting to me for the whole season, and especially in this game, was how much command Indiana has offensively in terms of moving the ball, particularly through the air when they need to. Curtis Rourke, 25 of 33, 380 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Elijah Surratt, 7 catches, 135 yards. The stars came out for Indiana offensively in this game. And even though Indiana certainly did struggle at times defensively, when they had to put the hammer down offensively in the fourth quarter, especially, they were able to do so. They outscore Northwestern 17-7 in that fourth quarter. And while it was a close game, I think to some degree, this was a Big Ten road game. I mean, as we talked about before, Indiana was 0-8 in their last 8 games in Evanston. It is hard to win on the road in the Big Ten. And Indiana was able to go in and knock off a team that has some secret sauce that makes them a lot more competitive than they look like they should be on paper. You can criticize the defense to some degree, and I think that some of that is fair, but I also think Northwestern just played a good game, a gritty game at home. They made a lot of good plays, and Indiana still won by 17 points and scored 41 points at Northwestern. I think all of those are really good accomplishments for IU, and I think, rather than be down on the team for not squelching Northwestern's offense, I think we should really be tipping our cap to Indiana for scoring so many points, because that has really become the primary method by which this team is getting their business done. And that travels really well, I think, throughout the course of the rest of the season.
The last time we didn't score 40 points was our first game of the year. Just let that soak in. We've had 5 straight games where we've scored over 40 points. 2 of them Big Ten road games. All of that is unbelievable. Here's a question we normally ask ourselves in these post games is, what was kind of the key play for us in the game? And for me, it came early, and it goes to what we were talking about with kind of the attitude shift, is that for so long, we've had coaches come in and talk about, we got to change the attitude. We got to, have a new regime. Indiana football's got to be different. And then they go out, and those teams, and I'm talking about Tom Allen, Kevin Wilson, Bill Lynch, all of them, they play not to lose. Like, they say they're going to play differently, but then when push comes to shove, it's like, all right, we'll take a field goal. And it's just like they're always like, let's be safe and let's just not screw this up and let's try our best not to lose. I look at 2 of the first 3 drives. Our first drive, we get the ball, and I think we've scored on like most, maybe all of our first drives up to the point this year. We have a 4th and 2 on our 27. Perfect spot to kick a field goal. We don't. We go for it. We don't get it. Maybe not the best play call. Like I think it was Surratt, like a little hook route, like couldn't make it around. Okay, fine. Like it's not the end of the world. But like I love the aggressive call. We punt. We score a touchdown. So then on our 4th drive, we're driving again. We're on the 7-yard line. It's 4th and 1. We go for it. And it's like, it's not even a, let's call it timeout. Let's think about it. It's just like, yes, we're going for it. And we score a touchdown. We go up 14-7. And to me, those 2 plays, I was like, this is awesome. Like we're not just talking about a regime change or a mentality. Like we're here to win. Like, and teams that win aren't going to take field goals in those spots. Like, yes, we're going to get it. And it ended up, I mean, there's a lot more game to be played. But if you take out that field goal, suddenly it's now, 10-7. Northwestern's going to score. They're going to get the lead 14-10. I mean, now we're kind of in a different alternate reality, but it's like that score to put you up 14-7 was a lot. It kept that distance where Northwestern was always just trying to reach back up. But to me, those were 2 of the biggest plays, just how nonchalantly maybe just we're like, yeah, we're going for it. Like, yes, first drive, 4th and 2, like you could have very easily just gone for 2 field goals there, but it's like, no, we're going to go for it. And then the fact that you didn't make the first one and then you have the same decision point, on the 7, basically 2 drives later, and you're like, yes, we're still going for it. I love that mentality. And to me, that encapsulates everything that's different with this team is they're not going in trying to just figure out a way to not lose to Northwestern. Like they're going in to win.
Well, and there's a macro analysis there because, first drive, they go for it on 4th down. They don't make it. And right. It was a good play call. It wasn't really executed that well, but it was not a bad call. But that set the tone. It's like, well, this is what we're going to do. You mentioned the 4th and 1 on where Miles Cross catches the touchdown. To me, the critical play, the play that decided the whole game, was Indiana, having taken a 34-24 lead. They turn Northwestern over on downs. They get the ball. They drive. They had the ball at the 36. They gain 5 yards. They have a 4th down. It's right on the edge of field goal range. They probably could have attempted the field goal. It would have been into the wind. It would have been tricky. They go for it. They don't just go for it. They complete a pass to Elijah Surratt, 27 yards, 1st and goal. They score on the next play. Zach Horton with the touchdown. Like, again, it's the mentality thing that you're talking about, where it's like we're going to make you use all 4 downs defense. Like, you don't just get to turn, get us to 4th down, and now suddenly we're going to punt. That, to me, was such a galvanizing call and such a galvanizing play execution. And to me, like, that's the kind of play, if I'm sitting at home, I'm standing up and I'm clapping, because it clearly said, we are going to go take this game. We're not going to punt, or we're going to hope that Northwestern doesn't drive down the field. We're just going to go take the game, and that's what they did. And I'll note, like, if you look at the way Indiana played in this game, this was their drives. We're going to do our recite the drives thing.
I'm just going to go to this.
Downs.
I'm going to go to this.
Okay, turnover on downs to start with, punt on a 3 and out, then touchdown, touchdown, field goal, touchdown, 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 end of game. Wow. On the road to score on that many consecutive possessions that's a winning football team, Scott. I mean, that's about the best I can say about it. That is a winning football team. That's what they do.
There's only so many. You just take 2 field goals out and touchdown. There's no other way to make a perfect drive chart out of that. And where this goes to, again, what I've seen this team that I've just not seen before, their defense and offense work in concert. So it's like the defense definitely did not have a great start to this game. And Northwestern was finding, some seams here or there. And again, this is not a perfect football team. But what's great about it is, you see, again, TD, field goal, TD, field goal, TD, TD. I liken that to like a python that's just like suffocating the Northwestern offense. I know it's the other side of the ball, but it's like, all right, Northwestern, like, you're going to have to score every single time now. And like, that's what helps the defense. Like, all right, defense, we got you, because we're just going to start scoring every single time. So now And I know this feeling because IU has been in this spot so many times on the other side where it's like, we can't stop, Penn Staters. They just keep scoring and scoring. And it's like, we cannot keep up this pace. Like we can't score every single drive. We've got it becomes maddening because there's no way out. We're doing that to other teams. And that's where our offense is helping our defense, where it's like, all right, hey, we got it figured out. Like defense, go take your shots. Like, and if you don't get it every time, guess what? It's not the end of the world because we'll go back up by 7 and we'll give you, here's the ball back. You're up by 7 again. And we know that you are going to stop them one of the next 2 or 3 times. And that's how a team works in concert together.
And I'll also note the following, as much as the defense has gotten criticized online, and I was critical in the moment, but I was thinking about it driving home, and then I was checking some stats. At the end of the day, Indiana held Northwestern to 24 points at home. Duke held them to 20 points at home, which is about in the same range. And if you look at last year, this is a Northwestern team that scored 45 points on the road at Illinois. They scored 23 points at home against Purdue, 24 points at home against Wisconsin, 33 points at home against Maryland. They 37 points at home against Minnesota. Like, this is a team that can score. It's not like they're completely bereft of offensive ability. And so I think you can certainly say that there's things that the defense needs to tighten up, but it was very much a bend but don't break type of defense. Ironic, given
we heard about, but haven't seen.
This is an actual bend but don't break defense. It was like this was less like a knockout punch by the defense and more like, well, we're just going to absorb a bunch of punishment but never get knocked down and end up winning on a decision at the end, which is great when your offense can land knockout punches, which is exactly what our offense did throughout the course of the game. So that, I think, as much as people have come out of this game, and it feels like the common consensus is that the defense is going to put a ceiling on the team, I think this is going to be a game and a team in Northwestern that is going to put some points up at home, and there's going to be some teams that can't execute on offense the way that Indiana did. I wouldn't look at that as being something to be critical about because road games are tough in the Big Ten, and Northwestern's proven themselves a good opponent. I do tip my cap to them for playing a really good game with a really good game plan, but Indiana was better at the end of it. And when Indiana needed to get stops, whether it was on that first drive that Northwestern had after Indiana turned it over on downs, whether it was holding Northwestern to a field goal after they drove down the field towards the end of the half to make it 14-10, whether it was that first drive coming out of the second half when Northwestern had a lot of momentum and Indiana forced them to punt after 7 plays. I mean, Indiana, and then those last 2 drives where Indiana, stopped Northwestern on downs after Indiana went up 34-24, and then stopped them on downs again for the final go in that last drive when Indiana was already up 17. When Indiana needed to make stops, they made stops in this game. And at the end of it all, I think that's what we should remember, not the individual moments where Northwestern was able to move the ball.
Well, if you just take a step back, if we were looking at this team as an opponent, like just take the name off the stats, it'd be like, we were previewing this game. It's like, Galen, I'm nervous about playing this, Team X, because they're averaging 47 points. They're giving up only 14 points. It's like, all right, well, in Big Ten play, here are their point totals they've given up is 13, 28, 24. It's like, all right, that you can score some, but they're scoring over 40 points a game. Yeah. And so, you're not going to win every game 41-0. And I agree with you. There were points where it's like, man, Northwestern was really having a go of it. You also have a mobile quarterback that's, that's always a tough wrinkle to deal with and is almost like a get out of jail free card once every couple of plays where you just, if the coverage breaks right, you're like, all right, I can run for 7 or 10 yards. But, it's a defense that kind of has a ceiling of like, all right, they're going to give up, our defense will probably give up anywhere between 14 and 24 points. But, you better be able to score those in bunches. And again, the thing is, we've never been down. Yeah. Like all these things, like it feels like we're almost an embarrassment of riches and we should just shut up and be happy. But it's like, there's been tense moments, and it felt very similar to the Maryland game where it's kind of nip and tuck. And then it's like, all right, we're going to land that knockout punch. And then it's just a dead team on the court, corpse on the side. But it's like, we were never at a point where we were down, and we're never at a point where it felt like Northwestern was going to take control of the game. it looked like Northwestern might be able to edge over the 50% win probability mark, and like what's going to happen there. But it never felt like, oh my God, we're on the ropes. It just felt like we're having a hard time putting this team away.
I mean, the lowest Indiana's win probability statistically dropped to in this game was 70.2%. So, like, as much as
fighting about, what the hell is going on?
Right, I know, it's wild. I mean, so as much as we, have nitpicks about, this is great. Actually, it's very healthy. It's very healthy for IU football that we're nitpicking a 17-point victory on the road against a team that we hadn't won at since 1993. So I'm
covered a 13.5-point spread on the road, and we're like, there's things to nitpick. It's wild.
Outgained them 529 to 336. I mean, these are the things that Indiana did, and you look at. Indiana outpassed Northwestern 380 to 243. They outrushed, and I was shocked by this. It seemed like the rushing was even. Indiana outrushed Northwestern 149 to 93. I mean, they
held them to 93 yards rushing.
Yeah, and
yeah.
So when I look at all of that, I think in the cold light of the next morning, this is a lot more impressive of a victory than it felt like at the time, and I think that is something that we can enjoy. You don't have to constantly look. This is the thing. It's like all of these people who have been out there saying, oh, Indiana had a bad game yesterday, or Indiana hasn't played anybody. It's like, if you apply that same logic to any of the teams in the top 25, you'd probably, I'd invite everybody to go look at Penn State's schedule and results and tell me what is so much more impressive about what Penn State has done. I don't hear anybody saying, well, Penn State hasn't really played anybody. I mean, they beat Illinois at home. That's been about it up to this point for them. There's a lot of, I can't tell if it's just natural trolling from the internet or if it's IU people like feeling like they need to kneecap their own feelings and expectations of their team because they can't conceive of the team actually being good. And look, you're always going to have people who are going to complain about, this or that or the other thing. But I'll note that Louisville, their fans have been chirping quite a bit. I'll note that Louisville's 3 wins so far this season are Austin Peay, Jacksonville State, and Georgia Tech, all at home. They've now lost at Notre Dame, and they lost at home to Southern Methodist. I mean, everybody's got some holes in their resume, but what I like about Indiana is they're not squeaking out games against the competition they played. They're winning these games handily. That when you leave the game, there's no doubt who won. And when you look at the statistical performances as a team, it's been really impressive watching what Indiana's done. And on an individual level, we had a kind of a rarity yesterday. Aiden Fisher did not lead the team in tackles. This is the first time that's happened all season. Jameer Johnson and Amari Farrell both with 6 tackles. Johnson with 5 solo tackles. Different players did step up on defense when it mattered. And you look at what Indiana was able to do overall on the offensive side. It was another collective effort with Elijah Surratt really being the standout on offense in terms of the number of really clutch balls he caught. But so much of it just comes back to Curtis Rourke and his ability to find different targets out there. Again, another game where 8 different players catch passes and, 2 players, Keyshawn Williams and Zach Horton, when they needed to step up and catch the ball and take it into the end zone, they did. Like there's so much to like about the way Indiana is still spreading things around. As much as the offense looked consistently good throughout the course of the game, you still feel like they're holding some stuff back in reserve. And that's the other really fascinating thing to think about, because this may end up being among like the 3 best defensive teams Indiana will play the rest of the way, along with Ohio State and Michigan. And that is pretty exciting to think that you go on the road and you're able to pass that kind of a test offensively against this kind of a defense. It really does bode well for what comes in the future.
And also you mentioned Curtis Rourke, it's the interceptions are behind us now. I mean, and I'm not saying he's not going to throw another interception the rest of the season, but the Maryland game started off rough. And then you have another game here with no interceptions, no turnovers, only 3 penalties for the entire game. This is a team that is playing smart football and looks like they're well coached and looks like they're well put together. I just want to go back real quick to the idea of the schedule and the kind of the naysayers to Indiana football. It's like whenever anybody brings that up about, oh, they played a weak schedule, like they also don't, they never also bring up the ... Like there's a team that won 3 games last year, had a bunch of transfers and has a new coach. Like all the other teams you're talking, like Penn State, you can make that same argument. It's like, all right, but this is also a team that's had James Franklin for whatever, 5, 6, 7 years as an entire infrastructure. Like teams that have huge turnovers and are basically coming out of the doldrums with a new coach don't normally do this.
Right.
And the other one that I hate too is like, we'll just wait till you play Ohio State. It's like, all right, well, that goes for 99% of the teams. Like, not a lot of teams are going into Columbus and winning. Like, and I don't think we're going to, but like this idea of like, oh, well, when you play Ohio State, things will be different. It's like, yes. And that would go for Illinois. That'll probably go for Michigan. Like,
I mean,
I might even go for the Colts for all I know.
I'll note that both Alabama and Indiana played road games yesterday, and only one of them won the road game.
Yeah, maybe we got the better coach.
I don't know. Anyway, I want to talk about the setup at the game. Any other items on the game itself before we move to that?
No, it's echoing all of the same things that we're saying, that I was concerned at times and like, man, but it just felt like why can't we put them away easier, which is such an odd place to be. But I was nervous and tense, but I never felt like we were losing control of the game. And that's something that is just so different with this team. And the other thing that I'll say going into a bye week that I also think is different is there was, I'm going to kind of go against my own point here, but the Outback Bowl against Ole Miss, you go back and look at it, actually wasn't as much. It was a much closer game than I think people remember. But that said, like after that game at Wisconsin, and there's a huge break, and then we come out, and we looked slightly different in the Outback Bowl. And it's like, ooh, like the pixie dust is gone. It's like, it's almost like too much time has elapsed. Like this is the fairy dust is gone, and this team kind of lost its magic and its mojo. That was a team that's needed to keep playing all the time. I don't feel that way. Going into a bye week, I'm not like, oh my God, I wish we were playing more games. I'm like, I'm excited for a bye week. It's like, I want this team to get healthy and have more time to be coached. And I think they'll come back even better. And that's a spot, Galen, I don't think I've ever been in. Like every other time, it's kind of like, I wish we could play tomorrow and just keep playing. Like right now we got them on the ropes. Like this feels like a team that is going to get better and going to iron out even more of the little kinks here and there. So that's something going into a bye week where it's like, I'm not worried about the magic coming off. I'm like, I think there could be more magic pixie dust put on this team.
Well, and we'll talk about that next matchup in a little bit, because it is really fascinating, and I'll tell you why later. But before we get to that, I did want to cover the overall scene up in Evanston.
We need a sound effect for like Galen on the road.
Galen reports from let's head live. No, it was. I got up there late Friday night. I was planning on coming in Saturday morning and change plans at the last minute. Went up there.
Chicago wanted more Galen.
Chicago needed me. I had been gone for too long, but. I went to one of the local. There were not a lot of drinking. I'd not really been to Evanston that much, and there aren't that many bars, not a lot of open drinking establishments early. And it was a 2:30 game. Like it was 3:30 for you folks in the Eastern time zone. The morning went quickly because it's 11 o'clock, and you're like, crap, it's like 3.5 hours till kickoff already. The first bar I went into, I walked in. They had the doors open. I walked in. They were like, hey, we don't open for 10 minutes, but you can chill, get a water, whatever. I'm like, that's fine. So when it opens at 11, just this tidal wave of IU fans comes in. I mean, it was like a tsunami where it's just like, whoosh, and I tweeted this. It's like very quickly, it was like a 30-1 IU to Northwestern fan ratio. And it was so crowded with IU fans that they had to stop letting people in because they couldn't get people. Like there was no service. It was like they were shocked at the number of people that were there. There was a great graphic that somebody sent me. I think it was Grace Ybarra that had the ticket, the get-in price for the Northwestern game and for Indiana, and then the get-in price for Northwestern versus Missouri, which is their next one. Indiana's get-in price was like $210. Missouri get-in price was Maryland get-in price was $6. Like it just highlighted, I think, how unprepared everybody was. You walking around Evanston, there were so many people wearing IU apparel. I got to catch up with so many folks that listen to the podcast and expressed, how much fun it's been listening over time. It was really gratifying, like just meeting all the people that have listened to the show over the years. We always say that, but it really was awesome to meet so many people that I hadn't met before. Got to see a lot of my old friends and people that I haven't seen in a while. We walked over from downtown Evanston to where the football stadium was. You have to kind of walk completely through Northwestern's campus. It was about a 25-minute walk. was a beautiful campus. It's always been a beautiful campus up there. The setting was really nice. There were so many IU fans outside the stadium. Like there was this large group of us that were hanging out like kind of near the entrance, and everybody was in great spirits. Everybody was excited. Getting into the stadium was actually, it was a cool setup. It really was. It was like a miniature football setup. It's kind of like if football was about half as popular as it actually is in this country. This would have been the ideal kind of stadium. The entry area, there were those trailers that have the portable toilets set up in them, which are much nicer than your traditional porta potties. They had, food and beer, and then you could kind of walk around either side of the stadium. And if you walked around on the east side, you were literally right up against the lake. Like there were waves 15, 20 feet away from you as you were walking down this pathway. It was an actually really cool setup. Inside the stadium, I mean, it was very basic from a bleachers perspective. It was such an IU crowd. The IU people were so loud. This was the first game that Northwestern had students back. They tried to make some noise, but IU fans were just louder. And it felt, from what I've seen as far as the television broadcast was concerned, that came through.
Oh, yeah.
I would say it was probably 65-35 IU. It was kind of hard to tell because a lot of the Northwestern fans were in the shadows over on the west side for most of the game. But the IU fans, like especially in my section in that north end zone, it was like a huge student section, but with people of all ages. And the players could hear us, like they kept motioning back to that end zone to try to get us to make noise, and we did consistently throughout the game. It was a really neat stadium setup overall, and it was really cool to see how many IU fans were in there and had spent the money to get in. A lot of the Northwestern people, not in person, but online, were pretty salty about the number of IU fans that were there. But, Scott, as I've said many times, it's just another bit of evidence that illustrates that Indiana truly is Chicago's Big Ten team.
Yes, I thought that was Northwestern. I've been told many times Northwestern is, yes. No, yes.
But it was, I mean, especially at the end, a couple of those touchdowns came right into that north end zone. The celebrations were incredible. And at the end of the game, that was the side that the players were coming in and out of. The players coming over and kind of waving to the crowd was really cool. And then Cignetti, after he does his television interview, comes over, and I think everybody's seen that video. If you haven't seen the video, go find it. He kind of shushes everybody and then leads everybody in a chant. I was trying to think of the number of road games that IU's ever had in football where a coach could legitimately go and do that with a large enough number of fans that it felt like it mattered. And it was such a cool moment. Like, those are the kinds of things, especially for the people who do travel, that build that emotional connection that we constantly talk about, where it's like, I want this team to succeed. I want this coach to succeed. It's like a level up beyond that when you get acknowledged the way that IU's fans got acknowledged during and at the end of that game. It was like a perfect setting for this because there were probably more IU fans at the Rose Bowl numerically by a pretty decent number than there were at Northwestern Stadium. But because of how intimate it was, and because of the fact that the players and the coaches could hear everything and they were acknowledging us, and that made it that much more special, especially at the end of the game. And so I don't know that you could have picked a better venue for IU to have that kind of a game in on the road. And it, I think, just made the whole thing even more special. I would absolutely recommend, if you live in the Chicago area, go see a game up there if there's tickets available, because it is a really neat setup. I will say, the one other thing I'll note, the wind wasn't that big of a factor. It would gust occasionally, and there was clearly some wind coming in, but ultimately it didn't really feel like, outside of kickoffs, it didn't feel like it really affected as much as we thought it would. We thought it was going to be a game where the ball was mostly on the ground. Indiana was like, nope, we're going to throw the ball. And outside of a couple of sailed passes from Curtis Rourke, it felt like Indiana really didn't get bothered by the overall conditions and the setup at all.
That's cool. No, on TV, I was jealous of you because it looks really cool on TV. Although the Big Ten Network they had a drone shot from the north end zone, just kind of panning over the stadium with the Lake Michigan on the left, and they use that shot. I'd say coming out and into 90% of all breaks. They kept showing it. They're talking about the white caps on the lake as, to gauge the wind. But no, it looked like an awesome setup. You could definitely see and hear on the broadcast the Indiana fans, taking that over. And what's also cool as we talk about the Galen road trip of 24, outside of Columbus, there's a chance, Michigan State has a very good fan following. Those fans get into it, but that's a team that could be on a pretty tough bender of a schedule. So there's a world where you could have a nice, 20 to 25% contingent in Spartan Stadium of Hoosier fans as well. So I think, it's a good time to travel as an IU fan as well, because I think that could be a fun atmosphere for IU fans as, also.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else that stuck out. I think just generally, the big thing was, to me, there was such great energy for IU football in that stadium. And look, I think Indiana would have won regardless, but it clearly made an impact. And this is one of the things that we've always touched on. You travel for IU basketball. There's always a ton of IU fans wherever IU goes to play. We saw that at Madison Square Garden. We saw it out in Vegas. We saw it in Atlanta. Like, Indiana always brings it with basketball. IU football fans traveling, that is an untapped force, but now we've seen it twice now, Scott. And granted, both have been kind of unique and interesting situations. Going to the Rose Bowl, that was obviously a bucket list item for so many IU fans. This kind of unique situation with not just a cool stadium setup for Northwestern, but also the fact that Indiana is Chicago's Big Ten team, and there are so many IU alums that live in and around Chicago that it's an easy trip for most of them. So there's some unique aspects there. And, but this is where, like, the Michigan State game, if you're thinking about it, it's not that far to drive to East Lansing. This team really does enjoy that kind of support on the road. I think it would be cool to continue to provide that to them as we move forward. Because, and this, to even more so, it's like the energy in Memorial Stadium is, I think, something that this team feeds off of and is going to really benefit from as we go through over the course of these next 2 months, plus hopefully maybe 3 months. The idea that there are fans cheering for them and that there's a real energy around IU football, you can feel it in person. So again,
4 more home games. The schedule's great.
Yeah,
4 more home games.
There are a lot of opportunities for Indiana to take advantage of this newfound fan energy that they've got. And I think ultimately, like, you look at the tickets, yesterday, I think they sold 600 and some tickets for the Nebraska game. Looks like there's still about 5,000 left. Now there's 2 weeks to sell those, but man, what a fun atmosphere that it's been watching IU football play in person. And, from my perspective, it's like now's the time to hop on all of this, because it's really going to be fascinating watching what Indiana does as this energy and this excitement kind of builds even more and more. Watching it on the road the way I have now twice, if you can get more of that into Memorial Stadium, that's going to make a big difference in what are, 3 real toss-up games for Indiana coming up over these next 3.
Yeah, no, and it's 7,000, almost 8,000 tickets left for Washington, 4,000 for Michigan, 7,000 for Purdue. Like, that is, we need to sell those games out. There's no reason at this point those games should not be sold out. I'm the Nebraska one that there's still 5,000 left. Like, that's something where really, if you're IU football curious, now is the time to hop in, because I don't think Washington fans are going to come for that game. I don't think Michigan fans might travel here a little bit. Purdue fans they are where we've been many a times, where they're checked out and they are done. But Nebraska fans will and can travel. And so, I would like to not have those extra 5,000 tickets available go to Nebraska fans. This is where Indiana fans need to step up. And this team has done everything it needs to do to have those 4 remaining games be sellouts.
So as we look ahead to what Indiana's got coming up, obviously this bye, I think, is really important in terms of not just getting the team healthy, but also allowing them to kind of reset their mindset as far as where they are and what they want for the rest of the season. This Nebraska game that you just mentioned coming up is going to be a really fascinating test. Like, you look at this from an FPI perspective, Indiana right now is a 76% favorite in this game, according to FPI. Nebraska had a really interesting game yesterday. They beat Rutgers 14-7. they should definitely get credit for that win. That was a nice win to get them back on track. They are 5-1. They'll probably be ranked again. Nebraska has really lived on their defense so far. They have only given up 11 points per game, and they've only given up more than 10 points once, and that was the game that they had at home to Illinois. But I'll note, that's kind of the one, I think, legitimately good team that they've played. Rutgers is fine. I don't want to badmouth Rutgers. I think Rutgers had a good season so far, but I don't know how well Rutgers travels. But, the other games that Nebraska's played so far, UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, as I mentioned, at Purdue, and then Rutgers. And this is an offense for Nebraska that's been having a hard time moving the ball on the ground. They're only averaging 3.89 yards per carry. They're only averaging 28 points per game. What's going to be really fascinating is the film study over the next couple of weeks. Can Indiana figure out a way to effectively score on Nebraska the way that Illinois did? That's going to be, I think, the big question mark, because if Indiana can make it hard on Nebraska with their freshman quarterback to move the ball and score consistently, much like you talked about, you keep stacking chips offensively where you have to make the opposition has to score on every drive, that to me is going to be the key. So this is going to be a real test for Tino Sunseri and Mike Shanahan and Curtis Rourke and the whole offensive setup. Can they find in this 2 weeks that they've got holes in the Nebraska defense that they can take advantage of with the passing game? And conversely, Nebraska is going to have 2 weeks of prep because they're on a bye as well. So they're going to be looking for ways to stop Indiana's offense. To me, that's where the game is going to be largely won and lost. That's going to be really fascinating to watch. And I think it's this is a game that should be a marquee game. This should be two good to really good teams going at it. And, I'm expecting this to be a 3:30 kick in Memorial Stadium. I think it's going to be one of those games where the hype is going to be build considerably over the course of the next couple of weeks. It's got all of the earmarks of being a really good, important Big Ten game in the middle of October. And Scott, Indiana just doesn't play a whole lot of those historically.
No, well, again, we're in the part of the schedule where every team we're playing is on a bye. It's this 4 or 5 week stretch where everyone just gets a bye against us. I look at the last part that you said to me is the key, is when you look at the Pro Football Focus grading, Indiana is the best offense in the Big Ten at 94.3. Nebraska is middle of the pack, 78.9. You look at the defense, we're actually graded above Nebraska. We're 6th in the Big Ten, 90.7. They are 7th in the Big Ten at 90.4. So going off those gradings, and to me, the question isn't how do we play against their defense, is how's Nebraska going to be able to score against us? Are they going to be able to keep up and score enough points to beat us? Because when you look at it, it's all right, the defense is a wash. We're a way better offense than they are. So that to me is really the key, is can Nebraska score enough to keep up with Indiana? And I echo everything you say. This is a huge game. This is kind of the first step if we want to get into kind of the crazy stratosphere that I think some of us are seeing as a possibility. This is that first step, because I think, Washington showed a little life against Michigan. Michigan State doesn't look great. Purdue doesn't look great. Every other game, Washington, Michigan State, Purdue are games that are a little bit probably easier than this game. Ohio State is in its own category, and Michigan, we can, it's probably a different category as well. But this is that kind of right in that slight step up. And if you're going to take that next step as a team, and we're going to really compete for some high level things, which again, if we don't, it's not the end of the world, but this is kind of that first step to do that.
Yeah.
And it's cool because it's against a named program that probably has some correlation to IU basketball, and that the name kind of is better than the team has been to kind of warrant it. But if you beat Nebraska, even if they're not great, that becomes a win that you can then suddenly shut all the people up who've been talking about schedule and stuff. It's that's a team that everyone knows. That's a name that everyone knows. That's a game where you can really change even more of the narrative of this season if you win that game.
Yeah, it's a lot of people have talked about how the second half of the schedule is significantly harder than the first half. It's statistically, that's not really what it looks like. This is the tough thing. It's yes, I know what the records say, but statistically, if you go down the FPI projections for, Indiana's winning probability to start each game right now, 76% chance against Nebraska, 72% chance against Washington, 80.5% against Michigan State, 73% against Michigan, 16.7%.
73% against just it's a wild stat. Just go ahead.
16.7% against Ohio State and 97% against Purdue. Like, that's what Indiana's looking at right now. Now, do they win all of those games except Ohio State? I mean, that's not the way that numbers work necessarily. But I think what's key with this team is that they clearly know how to win games. They know how to play at a level that is commensurate with winning down the stretch. They know how to put pressure on opponents. And I think a key, and actually Cignetti talked about this in the post game, they've now faced adversity a little bit in a couple of games. Like, the Maryland game, it was tied in the third quarter. Indiana had to really dig in and win that game in the last 25 minutes of the game. Same thing happened in this Northwestern game. Northwestern gets it to within 3. Indiana had to respond, and they did on both sides of the ball. So that's where I get excited about this because, look, I think Washington deserves a ton of credit for figuring out a way to beat Michigan in that game yesterday in Seattle. But that was a home game. And they're not going to be playing Indiana in Seattle. They're going to be playing Indiana in Bloomington. Nebraska deserves credit for picking themselves back up and winning these last 2 games. But, one of those games was against Purdue, who, my God, Scott, is awful. And the other was at home against Rutgers, a team that we don't think necessarily travels particularly well. Michigan State, I'm actually worried about that game because it's a road game. Michigan State is probably about the same, maybe slightly better than Northwestern in terms of overall. But that's the kind of game you're going to have to win if you want to separate this season and make it truly special. And then Michigan, Michigan's offense should really be concerning Michigan fans. I mean, they were kind of like, oh yeah, we're fine. We're, no problem.
The IU quarterback tree continues to grow with Jack Tuttle playing.
So I listened to that whole game driving home, and it's always interesting. I forget how much better radio play-by-play is than television play-by-play. And so I was listening to the Washington broadcasters, and Jack Tuttle comes in and immediately, Michigan goes on 2 scoring drives, and I'm like, what world are we in that Indiana is 6-0 and Jack Tuttle is saving Michigan's season?
Should we make a proposal that we take Cradle of quarterback away from Purdue now? Now that we have 4 starting quarterbacks in Division I football,
maybe Cradle of coaches too. We'll take that from Miami of Ohio. We're just calling Bloomington the Cradle from now on. I'm down with that.
Never daunted the cradle. I love it. But take it all back. And we'll take a drum too. F it. Bring us a drum too.
Unfortunately, Jack Tuttle, the Jack Tuttle that we thought would show up, showed. I feel bad. Jack Tuttle, I always believed Jack Tuttle didn't get nearly enough credit for how gutty he played in that Outback Bowl game. But he also was not able to win a starting job here at the end of the day. And it was interesting seeing him play well for a while. But I guess my larger point is not Jack Tuttle. It's that Michigan really doesn't know what they're doing on offense right now. Now, maybe they figure it out in the next month. But if Indiana can figure out a way to limit the damage that Michigan can do with their physicality, that is absolutely a game that is on the table. And again, it's in Bloomington. It's not in Ann Arbor. And these are the things that matter when it comes to these sorts of games down the stretch. So I'm not going to tell anybody to temper their expectations because, as I said at the top of the podcast, we get one of these seasons every 50 years. So enjoy it because I feel like this team's in pretty good hands. And look, all these games kind of, if you take the Purdue game out of it, which really looks very lopsided, there's a toss-up mentality to a lot of these games just in terms of it's the Big Ten Conference. It's hard to win a bunch of games in the Big Ten. USC found that out yesterday. They thought they were going to waltz into Minnesota and easily beat the Golden Gophers, and instead they lost. We're in a world right now, Scott, where USC is 1-2 in conference and Indiana is 3-0 in conference, and it's hard to win in the Big Ten. It's hard to win on the road. Both of USC's losses have been on the road. Indiana's only got 2 road games left in the whole conference. The home games do matter. And that's something to think about as we move forward. So,
it's funny, as I look at the schedule too, it's we have 1 road game. So I think all of us just Ohio State's a loss. And it's that's just it is a road game, and it is.
Again, we thought that in 2020, and Indiana, figured out a way to get that game close in the fourth quarter. So look, I'm not in a season as crazy as this has been. If you look at what happened yesterday, Missouri gets blown out. Alabama loses, Tennessee loses. The number of top teams that lost yesterday, this is just one of those seasons where nobody appears to be completely unbeatable. I am really fascinated to see what happens. And I'm also, Ohio State's a really fascinating case to me just in general, as talented as they are. If you want to talk about teams that haven't played anybody so far, I'll note that Ohio State is 5-0 against Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, at Michigan State, and Iowa. They've got to go to Oregon next week. They've got to go to Penn State in a month. It's going to be interesting to see, can they handle those road environments in this type of a season where it does not feel like any team has the level of talent separation that we're used to seeing in college football. And the fact that Indiana is the second to last game of the season, it's the game before the big game between Ohio State and Michigan. It's just a really interesting scenario all the way around. And again, I'm not expecting anything. Neither are the computers expecting anything. But nothing is off the table as far as I'm concerned with this.
I had fun joking yesterday. Watched it. We flipped over to the Alabama game, watched them lose, and I'm just like, so does this mean we're ranked number 1 next week? Like, does Indiana get the 1 ranking? Like, do we take it now? No, it's dude, it's all there. I mean, the thing that I'm interested to see, and I think we'll respond accordingly. But I think the other last test this team hasn't passed yet because they haven't needed to. But what happens when they get down? They've had these moments that have been tough, but they've been tied. I think there's only probably been, I guess, that Maryland game maybe once in the Northwestern game. Only a handful of times this year when even the other team has had the ball with a chance to go ahead in a game. I'd be interested to see how are we doing, in a game where we go down 7-0 or we go down by 10 points and the other team has the ball and they're driving to go up 17. Like how do we react to that situation? And maybe this team just never gets in that spot outside of an Ohio State-Michigan game. And again, it's not something we need to put ourselves in, but to me, that's really the only last hurdle that I'm not sure how we're going to react. I think we'll react well, but that's kind of the last thing I'd like to see this team, that kind of adversity to go against.
We had a couple of notes from various sources in social media. Jamie Jordan, who I met briefly at the game yesterday, longtime communicator with us on Twitter and a longtime listener of the podcast. He noted, I've been to a couple of IU road games. I've never had an atmosphere like that. I felt the same way. The only one that came close was the game at Purdue in 2015, where IU made it back to a bowl game because there were so few Purdue fans there and Indiana was so decisive. That was that game when IU fans rushed the field at Ross-Ade. But even that didn't feel like this did. It was a different energy.
Real quick on Purdue, like do you want to take a minute to just talk about how bad they are?
No, I really don't. I don't. Well, our time is very valuable on this podcast. I'm not going to besmirch our available time by talking about how bad Purdue is. Okay. Patrick noted, my favorite thing about this team is they can win in multiple ways. Versus Maryland, the offense struggled and the defense delivered until the offense caught up. Today, the defense struggled and the offense just responded time and time again. So much balance. I think that's all very accurate. We had a question from Matt Uhl. Can you think of another coaching change that has yielded such an overwhelmingly fast and lopsided result in college football or any other sport from one year to another? I mean, Norman Dale getting hired by Hickory, perhaps, but that is really more Jimmy Chitwood, I would say. No, it's tough.
Yeah, what's the moment Curtis Rourke being like, I'll play for that man.
I like that. That's good. It's, you know what? It's hard, and I kind of got taken off guard by this a little bit, but it's hard to think about, especially at the college level, this much of a turnaround happening this quickly. I'm going to dive into that. Maybe we'll tackle that on Bison Chat later, but it's a good question. And if anybody's got ideas on what the answer might be, go ahead and send them to us on the Twitter feed. We would happily receive them. Many of you saw this yesterday, but when Vanderbilt did you see this, Scott? When Vanderbilt beat Alabama, the students tear down the goalposts and they walk it the 3 miles from Vandy's campus onto Broadway in Nashville and then toss it in the Cumberland River, which that was a tremendous move. But Griffin Gonzalez asks, where would IU fans take a goalpost after being teared down? Like, what would be the proper place for a goalpost to be taken if IU wins a big game here on campus or finishes off, like wins a playoff game? Or hopefully they wouldn't lower the goalpost at that point. They would just let us rip them out. Where would be the ideal place to carry the goalpost after that?
Well, being a good podcast host, definitely Upland Brewery, and they take with the Hoosier Game Day Lager. Go to Upland Brewery and drink responsibly with your goalposts. No, I would, the Showalter Fountain always felt like the place, although that feels of an era that's our generation and not
correct.
Not there. I would say probably you're going to have a better answer because you're way more in tune with student state, but maybe like Sample Gates or Kirkwood seem like the place to go.
To me, that's the answer. Like you would rip the goalpost down, you would carry it out of the stadium. And here, I think I have a very specific parade route planned.
I love it.
You take it out past Heps Rock.
Home field makes T-shirts with Galen's parade route.
You take it out past Heps Rock, and then you walk it up to 17th Street, and you walk west on 17th Street all the way down to Walnut, or to College. No, to Walnut. Walnut's a better one. Then you walk counter traffic south on Walnut all the way to Kirkwood, walk it all the way down Kirkwood to the Sample Gates, and then you just lean the goalposts up against the Sample Gates. And then you have, like, I can already see the picture in my mind, like 5,000, 10,000 IU fans just all standing, blocking traffic about 3 blocks deep on Kirkwood with the goalpost leaning up against the Sample Gates. Like, it would be a perfect image.
Do we have a situation this year where we would do that? Because
when Indiana hosts the playoff game in the first round.
I don't even know how that works. I'm not even sure how. Like, I know that happens, but like in reality, like we beat Purdue to go like 11-1. Does that get?
I think if Indiana, with all the losses going on, if Indiana finishes the season with 1 loss and they've beaten, Nebraska and Washington and Michigan.
Oh, we're going to the playoff.
Right. And so the idea would be you have to be the 8th seed or better to host a first round playoff game. So you'd have to be 5, 6, 7, or 8 because 9, 10, 11, and 12 have to go to the other team's field.
Are we concerned we're too good? Like we'll be one of the guys?
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, Indiana's 4th. Therefore, you can't host a playoff game. There's some possibilities there. Absolutely.
It's like, God damn it. I wanted to host just like.
Well, was it you that asked me this or somebody else? Somebody was like, well, would you rather Indiana broke the bowl win streak and like not make the playoff, but got a bowl and then won the bowl or go to the playoff? And I was like, how is that even a question?
Playoff. Yeah.
Yes. Like what that. So obviously
that was not my question.
We're mostly just having fun with this. If anybody's like, well, these people are it's too big of a season. There's too many things that I always do. We're just having fun with all this, folks. But it's hilarious. We'll see what happens.
Real quick, I just want to go back to the initial question. The answer isn't this, but it's Cignetti's been compared a lot to Saban, which is also head spinning because it's like, holy shit, if we could have even like 1/10 of what Saban did at Alabama here would be awesome. But I'm looking at Saban's first year at Michigan State because that's a Michigan State team that in '94 went 5-6. Saban's first year went 6-5-1. He went 6-6, 7-5, 6-6. I mean, it's weird looking back. They go 10-2 that last year when the Citrus Bowl. Like Saban never really had a jump off the page year either, and it definitely wasn't his first year. So that Saban's not the answer. Is all I'm saying. I was just that's immediately where my head went to. But it is. I love the comparisons of, and you're seeing it more and more of like Cignetti and Saban getting compared together. And I like that because having a little Saban here would be awesome.
There was a great comment, and I'm trying to find it, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it before we finish up here, but someone said yesterday at the tail end of the game after the whole thing, I've never seen lightning captured in a bottle before until now. And it was in reaction to Cignetti talking there or like addressing the fans at the end. And that it really does feel, it was West Houston. There it is. I've never actually seen lightning caught in a bottle until now. It really does kind of feel that way. So look, who knows how long this ride lasts? Who knows how long Indiana is going to be able to keep this rolling? But I'm looking forward to enjoying it, Scott. I'm looking forward to a week off. I think everybody needs a little bit of a breather just to kind of take everything in. Where Indiana is going to be ranked. We're recording this at like 10:30 in the morning. Rankings probably aren't going to be out for another couple of hours.
I don't see us jumping much. I mean, I think it was a good. People are going to look at it and there's like other teams are losing, which is helping. But I could see us going up a couple spots. I mean, I think there's a world just based on name recognition. Nebraska comes in ranked higher than us, which doesn't make sense, but it's possible they could be at like 19. We'll be at 20. I think I see us going up 1 or 2 spots just based on Northwestern. based on our history, we'll have a week off. We'll probably stay the same, if not go up a spot or two. So I'd say, I know it's a question you didn't ask, but I'll ask it. What do you think the rankings are going into that game? I think we'll be ranked probably 18th maybe going into that game. And Nebraska will probably be maybe like 20th, but I could see them also being like 17th or 16th just based on the name rec.
Brett McMurphy has us at 15 in his poll. So take that what you will. We'll see where I think Indiana will land like 16 or 17. We'll see what happens though. Should be fascinating.
God, I want to play for a minute because it's going to get serious here after the break. Looking at the schedule, how high, if we can get undefeated into that Michigan game, I'm going to ask you two questions.
Okay.
How high could we get ranked going into the Michigan game? And if we beat Michigan, how high could our ranking get going into the Ohio State game?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question, and because a lot of it is predicated on what happens with all of the other teams. I mean, I think if Indiana...
Do it in your head right now, Galen. Start.
Let's say Indiana's 17th this week, and they beat Nebraska on national television. I think that they will be 10th or 11th in the country. Like, I think that would be where Indiana is. This is a top 10 team who, if you look at the full totality of the resume, who's actually won this many games against decent competition. I think if they beat Washington, they're definitely in the top 10. I think if they beat Michigan State, I think now you're talking about like 6, 7, 8 range because they will be undefeated at that point, and there won't be many other teams in the country. And this is the big thing. All the times we've complained about this, if you look at the entirety of college football right now, the rankings or the standings right now, like Texas is 5-0, Ohio State is 5-0. But Alabama's 4-1, Tennessee's 4-1, Oregon's 5-0, Penn State's 5-0, Miami's 6-0, Missouri's 4-1, Iowa State's 5-0, and I think BYU is 5-0. Like that's all of the other undefeated teams under the scenario that we're talking about, and all those teams
will lose between now and then.
Yeah, too. I mean those are all teams that are going to have some pretty tough matchups coming up. I mean, if you look at Texas's schedule, they got Oklahoma and the Red River this week, and then they got to follow that up against Georgia, and then they got to go to Vanderbilt, which is apparently not a walkover. If you look at Miami has to
and Vanderbilt too. You got to kick it into the city of Nashville now.
Correct. Miami has gotten 2 gifts now from the ACC officials, the Virginia Tech game, and I don't know if you guys watched the end of that Cal game last night. I fell asleep in about the middle of the third quarter. My God, and I like Miami football, but they should be 5-1 right now. But they got to go to Louisville. They still got to play Duke at home, and that's a team that's playing with fire right now. You look at Iowa State, which Iowa State just deserves a ton of credit. They actually, I think, they're on a similar trajectory to Indiana right now. And I'll note that their wins have been North Dakota, Iowa, Arkansas State, Houston, Baylor, and West Virginia. I don't hear anybody talking about how bad Iowa State's season opponents have been so far. And yet, if you look at where Iowa State is, Iowa State's 16th in the rankings, Indiana's 23rd, despite Indiana being ahead of Iowa State in FPI. Penn State, their upcoming, I can't believe we're doing this right now, Scott. This is bizarre. But Penn State next week has to travel to a very angry USC team, then has to travel to Wisconsin, then has Ohio State at home and Washington at home. Like, that is a murderer's row of teams. And then who else do we have on the list? Oregon is the other team that I wanted to look at. Oregon's schedule, they have Ohio State at home, so we're going to learn a lot about them. They go to Purdue. They have Illinois at home, and then they got to travel to Michigan. Like, Indiana, if they can just take care of business in these games that they're favored in, I will note again, they're favored at a 72% or better margin in each of these games. When you ask what the ranking ceiling would be, I feel like I'm getting electrocuted if I say this. The ceiling is like top 4 if they stay undefeated.
After Michigan State, you have us at,
I would say, about 7th in the country at that point.
And we come home, we beat Michigan.
Then I think you're 4th. So I think you've got like a top 5 matchup there between Indiana and Ohio State.
And if Ohio State, just hold on. If Ohio State has lost a game somewhere along the way, and they have a tougher, they have some tough games. Ohio State has to go at Oregon, at Penn State. If they trip up anywhere along the way, you could be ranked ahead of Ohio State going into that game.
And this is where the rankings are dumb because
I know, but it's like that would be.
But it's great to be in the light of the dumb. It's like the shaft of dumbness has descended out of the sky and has illuminated IU football for once in a positive way.
But you're saying there's hold on, just this is fever dream-ish. we go through, we run the table to Ohio State. So Ohio State is a different realm, but if we win out through Michigan and some of those losses happen the way you say, could we be ranked number 1 in the country going into the Ohio State game? I
doubt that. I really do. I think that there will be a psychological barrier,
right,
for most voters to say.
You were saying you're like, I'm going to get electrocuted. Like if we're like number 1 in the country. That's
why I didn't say 1, because I think that voters will ultimately vote. Georgia, Alabama, Penn State, Miami. Even if there's one loss, they will say, look, we don't actually think Indiana is better than that team, and they're probably right. I mean, let's just be clear. Like this Indiana team is playing incredibly well. They're playing with incredible energy and focus. They are not really, I think, a top 5 team or a top 1 team in the country, but the results are what matters when it comes to polling at the end of especially the end of October and beyond. So you have to balance all of those things. So that's where I would say just enjoy the ride. That's all I'm doing at this point is enjoying the ride. But I think your point is well taken, because this is the oxygen that we kind of got a little bit of a taste of in that 2020 season. And we were having not dissimilar conversations back then. And again, Indiana was ranked in the top 10 that season. That we didn't dream that did actually happen.
And I would, I'll just take a step back. Like this is all fun and stuff, but it does, even if I agree with you, we are not the number 1 team in the country. I don't think we will be at any point this year, even if we get ranked in that area. But getting a top 5 ranking, getting 1 ranking, like even if there's some extenuating circumstances, it still really matters. Like that was that thing with that Cody Zeller, Oladipo team. It's like they were ranked 1st in the country. It's like you were ranked number 1. Like that becomes a thing. Like you are ranked number 1. There is something to that. I would also say too that it seems insane to have this conversation, but getting ranked higher in this stretch we have ahead of us will matter, because if we lose to Michigan and Ohio State, but we win all the rest of our games, I think we'll be a fringe team for the college football playoff. And then if you've had a couple of weeks ranked in the top 10, that will maybe change voters' minds a little bit. And I know this is insane, but the college football playoff is attainable at where we sit right now.
So, we've gone an hour and 27. We need to stop the podcast soon. But I'll note we podcasted long enough that Bill Connolly's new S&P Plus ratings just dropped.
That's what we're trying to do every week.
So I want to note 3 things that he says in here. A, Indiana is now 17th in the S&P Plus, with the 19th ranked offense in the country, the 32nd ranked defense in the country, and the number 1 special teams unit in the country. Oklahoma's 16th, Kentucky's 18th. The teams that Indiana has on their schedule the rest of the way, there's only 1 team that Indiana plays the rest of the way, I believe, that's ranked higher than them, and that's Ohio State, who's 2nd in S&P Plus. Based upon these, so this week, and this is where, if you know S&P Plus, you start to lose more and more of the last year's rankings as they factor in. So Indiana keeps shedding that. With Indiana's win this week against Northwestern, Indiana went up 4.5 points in S&P Plus. So they've gone up from 29th to 17th this week. Indiana now, based upon S&P Plus projections, if it happened this week, would be the 11th seed in the college football playoff, playing at Alabama, which that's not a great matchup for Indiana, clearly. But that's where Indiana's at right now. And the last thing I'll say, if you take the resume SP Plus rankings, which is a power ranking as opposed to a resume evaluation tool, and it looks at how the average S&P Plus top 5 team would be projected to perform against your schedule in terms of scoring margin, and then how you've done. Here's the top 10. Texas, Ohio State, Miami, Ole Miss, Georgia, Indiana, Tennessee, Alabama, BYU, Penn State. So again, I will say this. You can criticize Indiana's schedule if you want as being too soft, but what Indiana's doing against that schedule, there are only 5 teams that would do better against Indiana's schedule than Indiana has so far this season. And that's amazing. And it matters. And, if we're going to give plaudits to these other schools for what they're doing, go ahead and give your Indiana Hoosiers some love for the same thing.
And on that perfect note.
Anyway, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you all at future games. Hopefully we get you all out to Memorial Stadium to see this Indiana team. You got a week off. Take the week off. Take a breath. Buy tickets. Get your plans organized. And hopefully we'll see you at Memorial Stadium in 2 weeks as Indiana takes on Nebraska. For this week, Indiana knocks off Northwestern on the road and moves their record to 6-0. Bowl eligible. First team in the country to make bowl eligibility. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is CrimsonCast. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Bring back the Bison. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody. And goodbye, YouTube.